From the studios of 850 AM, WFTL in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this is Outlaw, America's alternative voice, streaming around the world at outlawshow.com. This week, our special guest is Broward County Sheriff Al Lamberti. Now, your host of Outlaw has been a city commissioner and has decided to sit in the big chair. Here's Dean Trantalis.
Good evening. My name is Dean Trantalis, and welcome to Outlaw, America's Alternative Voice. Tonight's program is brought to you by R3 Accounting and American Tax and Insurance Services, both in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This is our second show, and as we continue the journey into an historic approach to educate, challenge, and to provoke listeners into hearing and understanding issues that directly affect members of the gay community, as well as their families, their friends, and co-workers. This is the first time in South Florida radio a program will feature matters that exclusively focus on the gay community. Each week we'll be presenting guests who will speak to us about a topic most likely you've heard about in the news. We will explore history, we will entertain hopes, and we will invite you, the listener, to call in and participate. Our phone number here is 877-850-8585. Again, that's 877-850-8585. The show can also be heard on the internet at outlawshow.com. The gay community is often referred to as the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered community. Each day, its members are challenged by discrimination and the consequences of bigotry that are often left unchecked by rules which govern our society. Outlaw will serve as a new voice, an alternative voice, to the messages most often heard in the mainstream media. It will act as an outlet for those whose voices cannot otherwise be heard, and through this dialogue, it will hopefully uncover new ways to put an end to injustice and inequality. Tonight, we will explore the gay community's relationship with law enforcement. We'll be speaking with members of the law enforcement community, and we'll talk also about hate crimes in America and how it's affected our community locally. Tonight, our guests are Sheriff Al Lamberti, who's Broward County Sheriff. Welcome, Sheriff Lamberti.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. In addition, we also have Captain Rick Wierzbicki, who is also the head of the Sheriff's Hate Crime and Anti-Bias Unit within the Sheriff's Department. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
And also representing the gay community tonight, we have the former president of the Dolphin Democratic Club, as well as the former president of the Florida LGBT Caucus, Mr. Michael Albetta.
Good evening, Dean.
Welcome, Michael. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
The purpose of tonight's program is to talk about how the gay community has been impacted by its growth in South Florida and how the law enforcement community has interacted with the gay community. And after this message, we will talk to each of you and seek your opinion and input as to what you feel has been the history of the gay community and law enforcement here in South Florida.
Financial and retirement planning can still bring peace of mind, even in these uncertain times. American Tax and Insurance Services has the tools for your estate and tax planning needs. Your family's financial security is important to us. Visit AmericanTaxandInsuranceServices.com to learn more about our legacy and wealth preservation services. Everyone claims to have good ideas. We really do. American Tax and Insurance Services. Business partners with R3 Accounting. Call 954-302-3228 or visit AmericanTaxandInsuranceServices.com today. You live a full and balanced life, and you want an accounting firm that keeps your business and personal finances equally balanced. R3 Accounting has the team of professionals who understand the useful balance of financial information and metrics. Visit us online at r3accounting.com to learn how we give our clients a full range of accounting and tax services. With over 30 years experience, your balanced solution is R3 Accounting. Go to r3accounting.com or call 954-202-9770. R3 Accounting, seeing your world from all directions. This is Outlaw, America's alternative voice. This week, our special guest is Broward County Sheriff Al Lamberti. Now, your host of Outlaw, Dean Trantalis.
Welcome back. I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of the gay community and law enforcement before we ask for the contribution of our guests. For those of us who came to South Florida in the early 80s, we've had a very checkered past in terms of how law enforcement has presented itself and interacted with members of the gay community. South Florida was not always the most welcoming of people who express themselves or who are identified as members of the LGBT community. And we've had certain instances, especially within the Sheriff's Department, of people who have held the post before Sheriff Lamberti, such as, if you heard in our show last week, we talked extensively about the former Sheriff Nick Navarro, who has recently passed away. And the type of engagement he undertook with regard to members of the gay community, singling them out, embarrassing them, intimidating them, using the full resources of the Sheriff's Department to denigrate a whole community. And why? Because he could. And today we're here to talk about what the Sheriff's Department feelings and policies are towards the gay community. And I think the best person to talk about that, of course, is the Sheriff himself, Sheriff Al Lamberti. Welcome.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it.
Sheriff, I appreciate your coming tonight because, as you know, you've filled some very, very broad shoes, and there have been a number of predecessors in your office who have come to assume their responsibilities in different ways. And I've come to know you over the years, and you've been a great champion, I believe, to the gay community. But there are those who find it hard to let go of the past. And incidents such as the bar incidents we heard last week on the show at the place called the Copa, as well as others, they remain in the minds of people, and there's a constant fear of the pendulum swinging back towards some sort of retribution or some kind of feeling that the political mood in this country may encourage your department or may feel that your members of your department have the license to go and engage in the type of activities that we've seen in the past. You want to talk to us a little bit tonight about the types of policies and procedures that you've instituted within your department, so that the people who are listening tonight can see exactly how perhaps your department has changed.
Oh, great, thanks. There are so many facts out there that we can't ignore, and I just want to start from the time I was appointed sheriff in September of 2007. In early 2008, I read the hate crimes report that's put out by the Florida Attorney General's office. Every year that report comes out. So in early 2008, I read it, and it talked about the year previous, 2007. And it said two things that shocked me, really. One, it said that Broward County leads the state of Florida led in 2007 in hate crimes. That's something that we shouldn't be looking for that distinction.
I happen to have that report in front of me, and it's a unique distinction. But in the Miami Herald article in which you were quoted, you distinguished the statistics from the reality. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Well, and then the second part of that, I just want to bring out that the report also said that Broward County is the most diverse county in the state of Florida, and they took everything into consideration: race, religion, languages, sexual orientation, so many categories. And to me, to lead the state in hate crimes and be the most diverse, something there doesn't fit. That tells me we don't get along with one another, and there's not enough tolerance, and we just needed to overcome that. And that's what I wanted to say. When you look at some other jurisdictions and they report zero hate crimes, that tells me that the community is not encouraged. In fact, they're discouraged from reporting. I kind of hope that Broward County, maybe we lead the state because we encourage our residents and our citizens to report those incidents. But like you mentioned, there's a big disparity in statistics. And to me, if a major jurisdiction reports zero hate crimes, that's a problem with the reporting process, that residents and citizens are not encouraged to come forward and report them. That's what we need to get rid of. And I want to encourage people to come forward. If there's a hate crime that occurs in Broward County, I want to know about it.
Well, hate crimes are an important part of tonight's discussion, but before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the procedures within your department, because we will always continue to hear from time to time people who report to our community, the gay and lesbian community, of incidents with members of not necessarily just the Sheriff's Department, but other law enforcement agencies, Fort Lauderdale Police, for example, who, when an individual encounters a law enforcement officer, sometimes doesn't always get the same treatment as one would expect in a county where there is diversity and where there's an expectation of respect for those who are different from one another. Tell us what your experience has been since you've been sheriff. What kind of feedback, what kind of reports are you getting, and what are you doing to try to counteract any negative incidents that have occurred?
Well, internally, the first thing that we've done recently is an 8-hour human diversity training class.
Is this for each officer?
Every deputy is required 8 hours a year of human diversity, cultural sensitivity training every single year, so that they and we have members of the community come in and teach it, as well as our own people. So, because it's constantly changing, and whether even the Muslim community now, and I talk about that. When I started here in 1977, there were no mosques in Broward County. Now there's 8 of them. So the culture is constantly changing in Broward County. We need that training. The second part is we put in a policy, an anti-bias racial profiling policy. We heard all these horror stories about racial profiling on traffic stops, and again, something we don't need. So between the anti-bias policy, racial profiling policy, and the deputies are trained in that, and the human diversity, cultural sensitivity training that they're trained in, in my mind, there's no excuse. It's zero tolerance. You've been told what we expect at the Broward Sheriff's Office. So when an incident comes up like that, and again, we've had very few of them, although there have been others publicized in other agencies, we kind of think we've been ahead of the curve and proactive in dealing with it.
And was this a policy that you implemented when you took over as sheriff in 2007, or was this something that you found was already in place? Did you amplify what was there? Tell us a little bit about your contribution to this.
We've amplified it. There were some at the state level. The human diversity came from the state, and we've expanded that. The other thing we did, and Captain Rick Wozbicki is here, we created an anti-bias hate crimes task force, because a lot of times these cases are not prosecuted, or you don't know that it's a hate crime, or it's discouraged to be prosecuted as a hate crime. So we created the Anti-Bias Hate Crimes Task Force to work with our federal partners, mainly the U.S. Attorney's Office for civil rights violations, and the FBI. And Captain Wozbicki is commanding that. And we've attacked some very high-profile cases: Norris Gaynor, the homeless individual, and Simi Williams here in Fort Lauderdale, where we've aggressively gone after those cases. The Peter Pan case on Dixie Highway. Those cases, we're treating it as a hate crime first and proving that it's not a hate crime, as opposed to in the past when law enforcement has investigated them, they investigated as an assault first, and if it escalated to a hate crime, then we looked at charging it. But our attitude at the Broward Sheriff's Office is we are going to treat it as if it was a hate crime and disprove it rather than assault and try to prove that it's a hate crime.
Okay, so just those who are listening tonight who don't quite understand what the definition of a hate crime is, initially in our discussion here tonight, we were talking about sheriff's policies, the sheriff department policies with regard to officers and deputies as they interact with the public. A hate crime is where the public interacts with other members of the public for the most part. And a hate crime has a unique definition, and is pretty much, to summarize, is something like this. If you commit a crime, say for example you punch someone in the arm, and that might be called an assault. Maybe it's like a misdemeanor, a third-degree misdemeanor. These are all levels of crimes that the legislatures over the years have come up with. If it's determined that when you punch that person in the arm, you also call them a racial or some kind of epithet that demeans them as an individual, in which the law specifically says you cannot do that with regard to someone's sexual orientation, their national origin, their race, or whatever, it bumps up the level of that crime. So you're not a third-degree misdemeanor, you might be even a first-degree misdemeanor or even a felony, depending upon the nature of the crime. So what does that mean? That simply means that the sentence or the punishment for committing that crime is also bumped up. In other words, if you were otherwise going to be charged with a third-degree misdemeanor, and that might consist of simply a fine or a suspended sentence, you're now facing tougher penalties, and that's where hate crime legislation becomes important. Now, we have hate crimes legislation nationally, and we have hate crimes legislation here in Florida. Fortunately, we have sexual orientation that has been recently included in hate crimes at both levels, and that's important. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Captain Rick Wierzbicki, who is the head of your hate crimes unit, and thank you, Rick, for coming tonight. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dean.
And so what we're seeing here is crimes people against people now. This is out in the public where you're called upon to assess a situation. The sheriff talked about a recent event, recent maybe last year, that took place on Oakland Park Boulevard outside of Peter Pan Diner, otherwise a normally safe place for people to walk or to ride a bike, and an incident occurred. You want to talk a little bit about that tonight? Tell us about the incident. Tell us how your crime force responded to it.
That was a very tragic incident involving the death of Craig Cohen. The two gentlemen were in Peter Pan Diner. It's open 24/7. Both were walking out. One went into one direction. The other walked across the street in a different direction. They were targeted by 2 or 3 individuals who had been partying, doing some drugs, drinking, and they were looking for singular targets. Didn't matter if they were gay, straight, they just wanted an easy victim. And unfortunately, Craig got killed and the other gentleman got beat up badly. Our detectives did a phenomenal job on that case. But all of a sudden you had people, groups saying it's a hate crime, it's a hate crime. Like the sheriff said, it's very important to investigate these thoroughly, gather the evidence, statements, confessions. Unfortunately, it was not a hate crime, it was just a crime of opportunity.
So there's a situation where, now the sheriff has said you immediately, there's a presumption that when there's a minority involved, there's a presumption within your task force that it would be a hate crime. Did I understand you correctly, Mr. Lamberti, that in fact, if there's a minority involved, you assume that it's a hate crime, and then you look to the facts before you charge them with any particular crime? Is that kind of how I understood you?
Yeah, and I think investigatively, if you look at it from the worst possible scenario and then go down, it's a lot. If you go in there thinking that, hey, this is a hate crime, rather than start at the bottom and work your way up. There's a lot of people that say we don't need hate crimes, so that legislation and statutes that, it's a crime's a crime's a crime. We don't need that. I disagree with that. And in this case, like Rick said, we assumed it was a hate crime until we could prove otherwise.
So would you say that is how would you describe that perspective that you have now put upon this type of conduct within our community? Mm-hmm. How would you compare that perspective with the perspective of your predecessors, who also were charged with enforcing, proper conduct within the community? Talk to us about that.
I can tell you, and it's a 180-degree difference, and in a lot of law enforcement agencies, it's a 180-degree difference. And it may be that way for prosecutorial agencies as well. But I would rather, again, assume the worst, because you know what, the facts will come out, and that's the way I look at it in death cases as well. You assume it's a homicide until you can prove otherwise. If you assume it's a hate crime, you're going to be looking for whatever evidence you need to prove that it's a hate crime. If you don't have it, then you're pretty much safe, to move to another classification of crime. And that's the way we approached the Peter Pan case. Hey, the 2 individuals were gay men. Let's assume that they were targeted for that reason until we can prove otherwise. if you do it the opposite, it was a robbery with an assault. And then you try to have to work your way up. But once we heard they were two gay men, they were obviously, they were these individuals these were predators. They were just looking for somebody to assault. And we didn't know at the time what their mindset was. And that's the difficulty in proving hate crimes. You have to be able to prove the mindset of the individual committing the crime, which, as you know, is pretty hard.
Okay, well, let's talk about that for a moment. I consulted with some attorneys in our community before tonight, and there is this issue of the mindset, because in America, let's face it, we are entitled to think the way we want. We can express ourselves the way we want as long as it doesn't hurt another individual or it doesn't incite illegal activity. But for the most part, Americans are allowed to think what they want. So now we're entering into a kind of a gray area of law enforcement, where now we're trying to include thought as part of the criminal intent. And so tell us, Captain Wierzbicki, how does that approach to your law enforcement role enter into your examining situations that come up, because you obviously have to cross that line of where people are allowed to think what they want as they're going about their daily life? How does that interact with the way you enforce the laws that you're charged to enforce?
Dean, you really have to have the evidence. The evidence has to be there, whether it be a confession, statement, computer records. You can't go into a person's mind, but you have to have the facts of the case, have to say it is a hate crime.
So the legislatures, whether it be Congress or the state of Florida, they have legislated that thought has boundaries as well. Because now, if you commit an act and you are doing it with a sort of a hateful intent, now they're saying you're not allowed to hate. You're not allowed to commit an act and target a specific minority group in order for, and that will be a crime here in Florida. Is that basically what we're saying tonight?
Yes, but Dean, you have to remember there's also hate incidences in relation to hate crimes. I mean, you can burn a cross on your own front lawn. That is classified as a hate incident. Whether it be then you go into physical assaults or targeting a synagogue, that's a hate crime. And sometimes people have problems distinguishing between the two, but there are two separate categories.
So a hate incident doesn't involve other people, is that correct?
No, it could involve other people, but they're doing something legally. They're expressing their hate, but they have a right to do that. Where you cross the line when it becomes a crime.
So where does it become a crime? Is that just defined by a statute? The legislature says this is a crime, this isn't a crime. Is there a guideline that is followed in order to determine whether or not we're talking about a hate crime versus a hate incident?
Every case is different. Again, the evidence is key to prosecuting and arresting the subject, but you have to have the evidence.
So, well, we can probably assume that it's going to be a hate crime if the act is perpetrated against another individual physically.
Yes.
Okay. But if it's against property, that has to be determined on a case-by-case basis, like incidents where people have burned synagogues or crosses and so forth against people's religion. That depends on the facts of each case. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And I think we had an incident at the airport a couple of years ago where somebody hung a noose in one of the offices. We investigated that actually as a hate crime first, but that was toned down to a hate incident.
But one of the most common ones, Dean, is the swastikas on synagogues. Those happen quite a bit, and obviously that evokes, to the Jewish community, a swastika painted on the side of their place of worship. I mean, that's in and of itself, a hate incident, because there's no other way to interpret that. That's not just graffiti. It's not like it was a gang tag or on the side of the building. That a swastika on a Jewish synagogue, again, for us and for the Jewish people, that is a hate incident without a doubt. You can't interpret that any other way.
Okay, and I know you're not a lawyer, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, so educate me a little bit as best you can here. So let's say there's a swastika that was affixed to a synagogue, and nobody saw it happen, and you interpret that as a hate incident. Now, if the person is ultimately caught, just affixing graffiti to a building is a misdemeanor.
Mm-hmm.
Does that incident now, because it was a swastika on a synagogue, raise the level of the crime itself and the punishment?
Yeah, in most cases you'd have a misdemeanor vandalism, but if we can prove it was a hate crime and we get the individual, it escalates it up one level to a third-degree felony.
So that's kind of how it works.
Yep.
That's what you're telling us tonight. Okay, very good. Now, because I'm referring to the article that I was talking about before, the Miami Herald article that was published last year at this time, in which the reporting of hate crimes seems to be what is skewing the statistics, because in 2009 they talk about Broward County reported 25 hate crimes, which brought it to be number one in the state. And I believe in the next week or two, new statistics are coming out for the year 2010. Is that correct?
Correct.
And but in that same article, it said the city of Miami reported 0 hate crimes in either 2008 or 2009. Now, I love the city of Miami, and I'm sure everybody in the city is law-abiding, but I cannot believe that there was not one hate crime committed in the city of Miami.
As large as it is, with like 400,000 residents, obviously, yes, I would agree with you 100%. And that's what I started with earlier. If there's that atmosphere, or the atmosphere does not exist, that, hey, we are going to treat these crimes seriously and encourage you to report them, or again, in most cases, discourage people from coming forward. Again, that's just not a climate that we should have. So again, the size of the city of Miami, I don't know what happened down there. I don't know how they report crime. I don't know what the police department does with them, and I'm not saying I do. But the people that I've talked to find it hard to believe that we could have 25 and they have 0. But
well, in the next half of our show, we're going to talk with a member of our gay and lesbian community, a leader who has been very outspoken on this issue, Mr. Mike Albetta, and we're going to talk about the need to report and the feeling of what the community, how the communities react to law enforcement when it comes to reporting these issues.